Hello everyone, and welcome to The Gathering. Before we commence our new haunted story, we would appreciate it if everyone can view the link that will be added in the description of this video, which will take you to a channel called Ginger Ninja. Ginger has just completed an extremely sad and heartbreaking story on the unsolved case of Natalie Jones. Please watch Ginger's video and share the link around as much as you can. You never know. The link you share may just bring some answers to Natalie's mother, family, friends, and even law enforcement. Please keep sharing the link, and let's all hope and pray for Natalie and her mom. Thank you.
While this story is being narrated, you can also watch actual footage of the house of Monte Cristo. About 4.5 hours drive southwest of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, is the sleepy township of Junee. Its only prosperity was due to the gold rush that swept the region in the 1800s. Not long after, the town's railway would link Sydney and Melbourne, allowing this town to further flourish. Today, Junee is primarily known for its agriculture. But on a more sombre note, it also holds the unwanted distinction of being home to Australia's most haunted house, Monte Cristo Homestead. Monte Cristo, meaning Mount of Christ, was built in 1884 by Christopher Crawley and his wife Elizabeth. The current owner, Reginald Ryan, has stated in interviews that while they have lived there for over 45 years, they are well aware of at least 10 ghosts who also reside at the homestead. There is Mr. and Mrs. Crawley, 3 of their children, and the others are numerous spirits of former employees of Monte Cristo Homestead. Throughout its dark history, it would be plagued by many unexplained deaths and freak accidents, and alleged acts of cruelty, leading to tales of tormented spirits who continue to haunt the homestead to this day. The late Victorian manor and its surrounding grounds have both fascinated and frightened the local community for generations, firmly entrenching itself in the darkest chapters of the town's folklore. John Strudwick, a local historian, said,
The main house lay empty and abandoned for a long time. Then it was vandalized and fell into ruin, which continued throughout the 1950s. It was always known as the haunted house. Hell, even the vandals didn't stay long. We used to play in the grounds when we were kids, but we never went inside the building, ever. There was just a really bad feeling about it, and none of us were ever game enough to tempt fate. It just felt bad. That's the only way I know I can describe it.
The first official death at the homestead occurred when the Crawleys' nanny dropped their 10-month-old daughter, Ethel, down the main staircase. The distraught maid claimed to her dying day that an invisible force pushed the baby from her arms. Over the years, many visitors to the homestead have said they felt a sinister presence on the stairs. Young children are also known to become severely agitated around this area, and many have claimed to have seen photos of a ghostly female apparition on the staircase. Mr. Crawley, who was regarded as a harsh and brutal taskmaster, died in 1910 from blood poisoning. He passed away in his bedroom. Some years later, a pregnant woman would also perish in this bedroom from an unknown cause. She can allegedly be heard talking at night in tearful whispers. Following her husband's death, Mrs. Crawley retreated to the homestead's chapel. This room would become her self-imposed prison. She spent the rest of her life mourning her husband's death, leaving the homestead only twice in her remaining 23 years on earth. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching of Monte Cristo's tragedies is that of a man named Harold. Harold's mother was a caretaker at the homestead and kept her intellectually disabled son chained to their cottage for 40 years. After she passed away in her sleep, Harold cradled her corpse for several days before the gruesome scene was discovered. He was severely malnourished and inconsolable. This poor young man was removed and placed into an institution where he sadly and tragically died shortly afterwards. It is said that even though Harold did not pass away at the homestead, his voice can be heard crying out for his mother. Over the years, and even to this day, many teams of paranormal investigators and psychic mediums arrive at Monte Cristo to do their own research. Many can hear the clanking of chains at night, ghostly whispers, the sounds of sobbing and terror-filled screams. They also feel instant bone-chilling coldness as soon as they cross the threshold into the homestead. Some have even said they can see the blood on the floor where a maid who had allegedly thrown herself off the upstairs balcony many years prior, and this maid was known to be a happy, vibrant young woman who showed no signs of ever being despondent or sad. The crying of young children can clearly be heard by some, running footsteps followed by children's laughter. There are also reports of a burning smell coming from the coach house, where it is said that a young worker had been burnt to death back in the 1800s. One well-known Australian psychic medium and also the founder of the Australian College of Mediumship, Kerry Waring, was invited to Monte Cristo, a place that she knew nothing about prior to her visit, and she deliberately avoided doing any research on Monte Cristo's tragic past. Despite this fact, she would continue to make some chillingly accurate readings. Kerry felt compelled to begin her investigation in the stables. It was here that she made a particularly strong connection with the spirit. Kerry says, "In here I see a child being whipped. I feel distraught at seeing this. There has been some abuse here, some awful abuse. I see a little boy," and Kerry is overwhelmed with sorrow while explaining this. Not knowing this at the time, it was this very part of the grounds where a young stable boy had been brutally tortured and burnt alive. Kerry says this young boy suffered intolerable cruelty. Kerry is visibly shaken while doing her reading, but she also says she feels another strong presence, that of a male energy who she can only describe as an extremely cruel person. She says, "I'm being shown an image of stabbing. Someone is being stabbed. I can see the knife and I can clearly see the dragging of a young body, the hiding of this body, covering it up as if it was nothing." Kerry says, "I can see a big A connected to this, like a massive big initial A, and I'm getting that it's hidden truth. The one with the initial A died of natural causes, so I feel they were never brought to justice for what they had done to this young boy, and that is why it is glaring out to me that it is a hidden truth. I'm now being redirected into another area where there is another presence of a young child, but I'm convinced it is not connected to the young boy who was tortured. Although there are no official records to either prove or disprove what Kerry saw, many have said they knew of a young girl who was murdered in the very next room that Kerry was being led to. And I will be revealing more of Kerry's findings in a second part to this story. But for the moment, we will continue on. The following story is just one of countless thousands from people who have visited or stayed at Monte Cristo Homestead. A young couple on their honeymoon decided to stop by Monte Cristo as they had heard so much about it, and their visit was more just mild curiosity. Their curiosity soon turned to ice-cold fear, and they never returned to Monte Cristo, nor even the town of Junee, and to this day their experience in that house still fills them with terror. The husband only ever spoke about it with one paranormal investigator, and refused to ever speak of it again. This is what he had to say about their visit to Monte Cristo.
My wife and I were excited to visit a grand property such as this, even though we had heard of its well-known haunting history and tragic past. That wasn't the reason we stopped by. We wanted to see the architecture and see inside this historical old homestead. As we walked up the staircase, I was enjoying the art hanging on the walls when my wife started to speak in a very soft whisper, so soft that I couldn't make out what she was saying. It was unlike her to speak so softly, so I asked her to repeat what she had said. Again, she just kept whispering, and it was impossible to understand her. I took her hand, thinking she may have been nervous, and I was instantly alarmed. Her hand was so cold, icy, freezing. I rubbed her hand to try and warm her up, and her whispering became louder but unintelligible. I was still looking at the paintings, but was starting to feel a sense of dread. I turned towards my wife to see if she was okay, only it wasn't my wife. To my horror, this woman was dressed in a long blue gown with her hair up entwined with blue ribbons. My wife doesn't dress that way. She was so white it was unnatural. Then suddenly I could see right through her. I'm not ashamed to say I yelled loudly in fright and stumbled backwards. My heart was hammering. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was then that I heard my wife behind me asking what was wrong. She was shocked at the sight of me, and without thinking, we just raced down the stairs. Just as we got to the front door, my wife screamed, and I saw her head being pulled back by something unseen. I could see her hair being pulled by something, or someone invisible. I picked her up and raced to our car and sped off out of that driveway, never to return. My wife's hair was all tangled by whatever had yanked on it. We drove for 30 minutes, then pulled over to hug each other, both of us knowing that what just happened was not of this world. We will never forget that dreadful experience, and we will never return to Monte Cristo. Trust me. There is something evil in that house, and I can still feel that icy cold hand in mine.
There was a made-for-TV documentary in 2007, an Australian documentary called Muir House. Now, if you're able to watch this outside of Australia, please do. I'm not sure whether it is available outside of Australia. It was, well, for that time period as well, very edge of your seat, very scary, about an author called Philip Muir House. And even though the actual documentary was fiction, more along the lines of the Blair Witch Project, it was all filmed inside Monte Cristo Homestead. There are so many ghostly encounters, hauntings at Monte Cristo Homestead that I think there will be a part 2. It's not only the tragedy of this homestead, it's also the fascinating stories of visitors who want their story told. Thank you.